What caused deflation at the beginning of this crisis? Now, in my opinion, there's three reasons why we experienced deflation starting at the end of September of 2008. Now, the first reason, of course, is because of the laws of supply and demand. Obviously, when times are bad, and let's say there's, or you lose your job, or there's a threat you may lose your job, or you may have to take a decrease in pay, obviously then it's common sense that you're going to cut back your spending, right? So what happened was you had suddenly when everything went bad, everyone started cutting back their spending. All of a sudden you don't buy that car you were going to buy, or you don't buy that big screen TV you were going to buy. So naturally then when demand for something falls, then the price is obviously going to fall as well. That's why, like with cars, for example, you had cars piling up in dealership lots, but yet the demand was falling. That's why now you can get such a good deal on a car, because there's just so many of them piling up in lots, and people just aren't buying them. Now, another reason why we experienced deflation last year once the crisis hit was also due to the fact that the money supply actually shrank. Now, most people probably are not aware that only 4% of the money supply is actually physical in the form of banknotes and coins. The other 96% of the money supply is actually in the form of credit and debt. So what happened was, when this crisis hit, all of a sudden, you had asset prices plummeting, you had commodity prices plummeting, you had millions of people losing thousands of dollars off their retirement money. It just went up in smoke. You had people losing their home equity. You had, you had assets all over the board just losing value everywhere. You had hundreds of billions of dollars, probably trillions of dollars that basically just went up in smoke, right? And because 96% of the money supply is mainly credit anyway, that's basically what happened. That's why you probably have heard the term from a politician say credit destruction. That's what they mean by credit destruction, because that's exactly what happened. The credit was destroyed, So in the end, basically the money supply then, as a result, shrank, because the credit is also part of the money supply. So when you have all these assets and commodities and everything losing value, as a result of that, you had then a big chunk of the money supply decreasing, right? So it's almost like they put it in simple terms. Let's say there's $100 in total money in circulation, just to give it a simple, easy number. $100 in circulation. Now let's say you have an economic crisis, and let's say of the $100, because it's mainly credit anyway, let's say $30 of that just disappears up in smoke. It's gone. So let's say now there's only $70 in total money in circulation now. Now that $70 is going to have more buying power. The buying power of that $70 theoretically should be the same as what the $100 had before. It's going to gain value because you lost 30% of the money supply. Now, I don't know what percent of the money supply was destroyed, but that's mainly what happened, right? Now, that's why oftentimes people will, like last year when governments were throwing around these massive, incomprehensible amounts of money for bailouts, people were saying, well, how come we're not seeing massive inflation, due to these bailouts, massive amounts of increases in the money supply? It's because of the fact that a huge chunk of the money supply was destroyed. So therefore, governments then had kind of a bit of wiggle room or slack. They could actually increase the money supply then without really affecting inflation all that much, because a big chunk of the money supply was destroyed due to, like I said, asset prices falling, commodity prices falling. All these things contributed to the money supply shrinking, right? So that's why then governments could then print these massive amounts of money and for all the bailouts and not really affect inflation, because of the fact that like I said, the money supply was smaller. So like I said, let's say if the money supply now is $70 and originally it was $100. So let's say if the governments then print an extra $10 and now the money supply is $80, well, it still really won't affect inflation all that much, because it's still lower than the $100 mark that it was before. That's the thing. So as long as governments let's say, don't increase the money supply to the $100 mark like it was before. I mean, this is a fictional number, but let's say they bring it to the $100 mark that it was before, right? Like the $100. What would happen is then the inflation rate really, theoretically, really shouldn't be any different than what it was when it was 100, right? But see, what people are afraid of, a lot of people are afraid of, including myself though, is what's going to happen is governments are going to increase the money supply to way beyond what it was in September or before September of 2008. And that's what people are worried about. So that's why you don't really see, massive inflation now or even hyperinflation, because it gave governments wiggle room, because the money supply, a big chunk of it was destroyed. And of course, the smaller the money supply, the more value the money has. That's another reason why you had deflation. Now, third reason why you had deflation, in my opinion, was simply due to mass liquidation. Now, what that is let's say you have a bank that is about to go under. A bank is in a lot of trouble and it needs to scrape together as much capital as it can. So what happens then in that situation is a bank then will suddenly just start calling in all their loans because they need capital because they're in trouble. So of course what happens then is, let's say you have a debt with a bank. All of a sudden the bank now calls in their loan. In order to meet the margin call now, you're going to have to start selling off assets now to raise up enough cash in order to pay the debt. So that's another thing that happened. Because suddenly, banks were calling in loans, people then were selling off, massive amounts of assets in order to reach the margin calls for their loans. So then, as a result of that, it created this huge demand for cash, specifically US dollars. So that's also why you saw then an increase in the value of money, because there was a huge demand for cash. People were like selling off assets to get cash. And you probably heard the term, people were saying cash is king, because there was so much uncertainty. And of course, if you have to make margin calls, or you may have to make them, you're going to hold cash for that reason. It's like a safety mechanism. So those are really the three main reasons why, in my opinion, why we experienced deflation last year when the crisis hit at the end of September of 2008. Again, it was because of the laws of supply and demand, which most people understand that, how supply and demand works. Kids understand that as well. That's pretty simple to grasp. But you also have as well, like I said, a huge chunk of the money supply, because it's mainly credit, it was destroyed. Credit comes from thin air, and it also can go back into thin air where it originally came from. So again, a second reason was because a big chunk of the money supply was destroyed, which then gave more value to the rest of the money that was still out there. And a third reason why we experienced deflation, like I said, was also because of mass liquidation. People selling off huge amounts of assets in order to raise up enough cash to meet whatever margin calls they might have had on, like I said, debts possibly that banks were calling in, because the banks themselves were in trouble. So anyway, that's my opinion. I'm not trying to say that I'm right or I'm wrong. It's just simply my opinion. Those are three reasons, in my opinion, why we experience deflation. Now, of course, we are starting to experience inflation now. A lot of like precious metals and oil. A lot of things now are and other commodities now are starting to rebound from the fall in price that they all experienced last year. Now, will we see bad inflation or possibly hyperinflation? Really, I don't know, right? It's my opinion. Honestly, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I'm an expert. It's my opinion, but I'm not an expert. I can't really answer that question. I don't have a crystal ball. But again, like I said, though, theoretically, though, I do believe though that governments are going to increase the money supply if they didn't already do it to way beyond what it was in September 2008. So I believe at that point though, that's when you should see really bad inflation. So anyway, again, that's my opinion. Leave a comment. I'd like to see what other people think. And anyway, thanks for listening, and have a great day.